hmm Which I think if we took the time to just reframe what failure looks like, I think more people would actually be more successful than they are.
Welcome to Live Your Life Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Stefanie Thayer. This is a place for tired and overwhelmed women to gather together. Whether you are seeking or already following God, I aim to bring hope, fulfillment, and purpose to your life. So let's dig in.
Not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling. But that's what failure is you figure out what went wrong and you fix it. And not everybody's willing to fix it. Which, I mean, who does? Failure hurts.
Failure is hard. And actually, I resonate with your email thing. My emails are in there. I'm just not actually sending my newsletter. And if you are in business, you guys, email is still the number one thing. Like the most traction is from email. I know we all think it's social media, but it's actually email. So I think if you've ever been an entrepreneur, there's a lot that you learn from failure. But just lots of different life lessons, which we were talking before we started recording this about athletes, and you fail all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to be an athlete and not fail.
Mm-hmm. Which I think if we took the time to just reframe what failure looks like, I think more people would actually be more successful than they are. Like even when I start each softball season or basketball, whatever I happen to be coaching at the time, I started off with, this is a game of failure. And it is that way because if we're not learning from the mistakes we're making, we will never be successful. Not ever. Because we're just going to get trapped in our soundtrack, in our mind, and just going to spiral downward. And that's just not helpful for anybody. Not at all.
I can think of two stories. So I grew up in the Sierras near Tahoe, and we would ski every Friday as a school. So super fun growing up.
That's exciting.
And there was this phrase that they would say, which was, if you didn't fall today, were you even trying? Because some of the kids would brag about, oh, I didn't fall. Well, if you fell, you were pushing yourself. Obviously, you don't want to get hurt, but if you're not pushing yourself to that brink, you're not actually progressing. So I don't know why that just came to mind, but I had made a note to share this when my son was probably 10 or 11, and he's in Boy Scouts, and one of the first ones you do is this like athletic badge, and there's a mile that you have to run, and you do it at different, it's like 16 weeks, and you show improvement, right? So a lot of kids in junior high do similar things. Well, I have very athletic children. None of them like to run. None. So we started to run on the street, and I was trying to teach him how to pace. I have my tracker watch, and I was like, let's just pick a pace rather than crazy, because that's where you get in trouble, especially kids and men. Like if you're a CrossFitter, you see the men all go like crazy on the first round and then they peter out. I'm picking on them because they can't defend themselves.
Right.
And so we're probably in 2 minutes. And the first part's the worst when you get all that going and you just want to stop. If you can push past it, you're usually fine. And I'm like encouraging him, and he goes, I can't. And I just stopped and I looked at him. I said, what did you say? And he goes, I can't. And I turned around, I ran home, and I left him on the street, and he was crying. And I know some of you are going to be like, man, you are a mean mom. Well, let me tell you, Lupe and I are a little bit different. Lupe is raising daughters. I am raising sons. And you know what? I am raising them to be amazing young men, not to be weenies. And I don't mean that mean. So he came back to the house, and he's like, you left me. I left him like 200 yards from the house. We live in the country, okay? And I said, do you know why I left you? And he goes, no. I said, do not ever say, I can't. And he stopped. I said, you already decided in your mind you were done. I said, say, I can. Say, I will try. I will do my best. And so we have this whiteboard because our garage was a gym. He went over to the whiteboard, and really big, he wrote, I can. That stayed up for like 5 years in our garage, this I can. And so ever since then, it was like, don't say I can't. Just say, I'm going to do my very best. I'm going to do a little bit more than I did yesterday. And it actually was really impactful for him. And it was hard as a mama to leave him on the street. I mean, we love our kids, but
my girl's the same way, to be honest.
Oh,
because
okay.
I want them to be strong, independent women. I don't want them to be reliant on anybody but themselves.
Yeah, that makes me
and
happy.
So it's very, very similar. I probably would have done the same thing in that situation.
And to be fair,
mm-hmm.
I have two stepdaughters and the same. I wanted them to be strong and athletic and confident in other areas than like how you appear, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and something that I teach my athletes is like, even if you feel like you can't, the way, like, you know this, our words are powerful. And so the way that you phrase it is exactly what's going to happen. And so even if you say the word I can't, I need you to add yet at the end. So I can't yet. And they're like, huh, I do feel different. I'm like, yeah, because we are understanding, yes, I'm not very good at this right now. But as I learn and get better, eventually I am going to be able to do it. And they're like, wow, like just the mind blown is how they all feel when I say that. And they're like, this is crazy. I'm like, yeah, because you might not be able to do it now, but you will be able to do it as long as we continue to learn from our mistakes. And that takes time.
It shows the most dangerous stuff is our mindset, right? It's the broken record. It's what we say in our head, not actually what the result is or the outcome. And the older I get and the more I have people confide in me, I'm never surprised by what someone tells me now. Sometimes I even know what horrible story is coming. I feel like as you get older, and there's always a space for grace in that. And it's about if you're staying there, right? And so one of the things I love about God is that anything that's brought into light can't really be picked on anymore. So that thing that you're sitting in that you think you failed in or you're shameful of or whatever, once it's exposed, the only place to go from there is up.
Yep.
And if people are super judgy of you or whatever, they're probably not your people, which is where really having folks that love the Lord and guide you back to that, even if they say you're wrong, like you need to go fix this or you need to repent or whatever, but it's not the end of your story, right?
Yep.
Like the failure is actually one of the most beautiful building blocks we could have if we let it.
Yep. 100%. Which I think most people don't see it that way. They're like, oh, I failed. And then they wallow. And I'm like, whoa.
And so they don't show up.
Yeah, it just rips my heart apart because I'm like, you do realize that you are sabotaging yourself, which now bring in worthiness. Most of us are failing and continue to fail because we don't feel worthy of achieving the thing, which I, from experience, know this all too well. I have built a business to be super strong and then ate myself alive. And the business came crumbling down. And I was like, I don't know what happened. And then I went to therapy. And my therapist was like, you did this to you. And I was like, oof.
You're the problem.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that hurts a little bit. That hurts a little bit. But you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I totally did this to myself. And what I actually found out was being bullied growing up is what led me to feel like I couldn't be successful. And so even when I achieved the success, it was like, nope, you can't have this. Gotta take it away. Like, nope, you're not worthy of this. Even though I am. And in the Bible, it backs that up. I am worthy of these things. I just forgot. And so it's interesting when you move away from reading your Bible daily, how much you forget about how God actually sees you. And it's like, oh, that part. I am worthy of all these things. I just beat myself up mentally and listen to the lies of the enemy instead of being like, no, actually, that's not true. God doesn't say that about me.
No.
And like you said, bringing it to the light is the starting point. Like, bring it into your awareness is the quickest way to shoot it down.
Even just a little speck of the light, right? And as I hear the birds in the background, it's funny, the first verse I wrote down to talk about worthiness is Luke 12:6-7. And it talks about how you could buy 5 sparrows for 2 pennies, which is like nothing, and how valuable they were to the Lord and how much more valuable we are to him, to even consider that he wouldn't care for us. And I think it's easy for us to hear that for other people, but it's not always easy to hear it for us, right? And Satan is the greatest deceiver. So he takes a truth and he turns it on its side a little bit. And most of the damage we have done is really done when we're children, usually by people that love us deeply and don't know, but they say, you're so this, or don't be like that, or whatever. And so you start to believe, like for myself, I was told I was really emotional. So I learned like not to have emotion, to be really quiet, to people please in my house. So I believed that I had to do that. And that wasn't true. And then as an adult, you start fulfilling those things, right? And so you usually are your worst limiter. And in business, I did the same thing. I got very successful and I got to a certain dollar amount. And then I kind of freaked out. Like, I'm not worthy of this. This isn't like something is wrong. I shouldn't be able to have, and all of that is a lie. It's, money in the hands of good people does really good things, or influence, which I had a lot of influence. But we are the problem.
Yeah. I hate to admit it, but I am my own problem. I'm still a work in progress. No matter how much therapy I go to, how many personal development books I read, my own personal mindset coaching on myself, I'm still going to misstep sometimes. But I am going to continue to get back up. Like, that's the difference. I mean, you even see it in the Bible with Judas and Peter. A lot of people forget that Peter and Judas were like this, and they did similar actions. And so it's like, don't be a Judas. But it's like, but what about Peter? Because Peter also did that. The difference between them, though, is when Judas failed, he failed and was done. And Peter continued to move forward and progress, which is similar to when we fail. If we don't continue to get back up and seek what we were trying to achieve, we're just going to stay stuck.
Well, and the ironic thing about that story, because we all know about Judas, how he betrays Jesus for a little bit of money. And then ultimately he commits suicide. If you haven't read that, it's really heartbreaking. But Peter is Jesus's BFF. Okay. And he tells him, you're going to start my church. And Peter's like, yeah, whatever. He also tells him, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he goes, no, I don't. And I'm pretty positive Peter denies him 3 times in a row after Judas has turned him in. So he already has this warning of like, oh, don't be like your buddy over
Judas
here.
did it for money. Peter did it for free. Like, he was just like,
he's afraid.
Yeah.
Well, and how many times have we found ourselves in situations where we deny something or we back away from something and it was wrong, but we didn't want to be seen a certain way, but God, because he still loves Peter, and Peter does start the church in Acts, by the way. But
he ends up being
Peter
super successful for the kingdom. Like, it's remarkable.
Right. He came back, but he came back to the Lord. So even in that, and he was very upset because he realized the 3rd time what he had done.
Yep. Well, I'm like, we hear it all the time in business. Your setback is just the starting point to your comeback. And it's the same with what we see in this story in the Bible. Like, his setback was his initial start to glorify the kingdom in probably the best way possible. I don't do the best job of glorifying the kingdom most of the time, but I can see where God was at in those specific action steps. I may not always say, like, this was God speaking through me kind of thing, but, like, I personally know, like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm on the right path.
Well, and that's where also, listening to worship, being in prayer, being in the Bible, it says to know your Bible. I don't know if you guys know this, but it wasn't really split into books and chapters and verses. And so I'm really good at knowing a certain verse, but I may not be able to tell you where it is in the Bible. It's know your word. When you're under pressure, when that crisis happens, what comes to mind? Is the first thing that comes to mind hurtful, worldly, or is it God's truth that he says over you? Because we don't always see it, right?
Yep.
And that's why being in it daily is really important, even if it's just a verse. I talk about the Bible app all the time, YouVersion. It's fantastic. And they even have the verse of the day set up kind of like a story in social media. So you can listen to a different pastor talk for about a minute, and then they go through application. It takes you 2 minutes, maybe. It's amazing.
Yep. I love that app. Also, because I'm dyslexic. And so the fact that it will read me the verses is super helpful to me. Yeah. I have a very hard time because my brain will just crisscross things. And I'm like, I don't think that's what it said. And then when I listen to it, I'm like, oh, it wasn't what it said, but that's what my brain thought it said.
I actually, I read a chronological Bible in a year, and most days I get through it. It's usually about 3 chapters. Sometimes I'm on catch up, but I actually like to play the audio, and I love the NIV voice guy. He lives in New York. He does it for a certain church. I love to listen to him. His voice is so good, but then it lets me write. I do write my Bible. It's pretty amazing, actually. I put the dates in there and how God has shown up, but because more comes out to me than if I'm focused on reading it. I don't know why, but it's a really nice feature. And if you have kids, young adults, you want to have fun, there are some really funny translations that are ridiculous, and they will read it out loud to you. There's some like
my kids found the Gen Z one, and I was like, "What are you guys listening to?" And they're like, "The Bible," and I was like, "That's ridiculous." First of all, but also,
one of them,
at least you understand it.
It says like hype, and he was a homie, and I don't know.
Yeah, talking about the side chick. Yeah, and I'm like, well, if you are consuming it and understanding however you need to consume it, do it that way. I'm not opposed. I was like, I like the more traditional version, but I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to I would say like a journalist, a pretty well-known journalist, and he was talking about how people always look at the success and think like, oh, he's about 40. You're so successful and blah, blah. He goes, people only see that. What is the end point or like the high? He's like, you have no idea. I mean, I would be, in the back of my car, and if I happened to sell 5 books from an event I did for free, like I came home and told my wife we were crushing it. Like he made $50 for the whole day. Like it's pretty much everyone that is successful, whether it's financial influence, kingdom work, there's so much yuck you don't see. And so often we see the highlight reel and we think that's it. Well, if you actually get to know that person, they would tell you, oh, no. And I still have these struggles. I still have these areas I don't believe in myself, but God.
Yep. I actually had a friend recently was like, I don't understand how you're just like crushing it. It's like, oh girl, I'm not. Like, you're just witnessing my highlight reel. No. I was like, it would be very depressing if I put literally everything on my socials. You would be like, oh girl, what's wrong with you? I'm like, yeah. I was like, but it's the work in the dark that gets you those highlight reels. And that's what most people don't recognize these days, is you have to do that work where nobody's paying attention. And even in sports, I tell my girls, I was like, how you practice is how you play. So if you want to be able to have fun on the field, we got to get to the nitty gritty here and make all the mistakes here in practice. Like, it's going to be hard. And I make my practices really challenging. Like, I just came back to coaching 12U softball from coaching varsity softball. And I treat them like my varsity softball players because I'm going to push them. And then I'm like, oh, wait, they're only 12. Like, pump the brakes. But at the same time, I'm like, no, this hard work that they're doing is going to pay off. And when they're freshmen, they're going to be making their varsity teams because I challenged them. And most people don't want the challenge in the dark. They just want the Jesus glitter and like all the excitement. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. No. And I do get vulnerable on my social, but not as often because I don't want it to be depressing.
Well, and I would also say that young people, I think they are capable of a lot more than most people give them. And so if you're treating those 12-year-olds like they're 17, as far as the expectation, the maturity, the development, and sports is huge mindset. If you guys don't think that, you can have the best athletes and they do not do well. And actually a great book on that is Relentless. I've had my kids all read it, and he's coached the best basketball players of all time. And he says, oh yeah, Shaq, no mindset there. If he had the mindset,
he would have been unstoppable.
Yeah. Unstoppable. And so, and the other thing I like to talk about too, a lot of times people say, oh, you're always so happy. I am a happy person. But it's not about happiness. It's about choosing joy. So joy is a decision, and there are rough days, and we all have rough. And so when I do post or get on social media, where will I share some of the rough? Of course. I think we do need to be somewhat transparent. We don't need to tell everything on social, but I also don't want to get on there and bash and feed that negative. So when you've failed, if you're sitting and just focusing on it over and over, that grows. That grows.
Yep. Where focus goes, energy flows, which is hard to teach that to young athletes. It's so hard. But it's necessary. It's necessary. It's a step that I feel like we skip over. But I also have conversations with their parents too, because I feel like the generations before this generation that we're raising up right now, we were taught like go hard or go home. Like, perfection is everything. And that's not achievable. It's not achievable. And so I tell my parents, if you don't have anything encouraging to say to your child, do not say it at all. Don't say it at all. Because you're just harming them. And you're creating this complex within them that you're going to have to pay for later in therapy. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize. I was like, and we don't, because we were raised in a very different generation where that was acceptable. Yeah. And it's just not. It's just not.
Yeah. And perfectionism doesn't serve us either. I mean, I have it. A couple of my kids have it. And one of the things I have tried to focus on as a mom is, did you do your best? Because, you know, I always have had asked this, like, do you expect your kids to get straight A's? No, I do not. But I expect them to put a solid effort in. And if a C is a solid effort, I'm going to be so proud of them. I'm not going to punish my kid for bad grades. I have a child that tends to get straight A's and does the bare minimum. And I repeatedly say, we don't do the minimum here. I need to see you put a solid effort in. So it's not always about how others see it. It's what are you capable of, right?
Yep. Which is something I also tell my athletes. Like, if you literally only have 50% energy to give me today, I still want 100% of that 50%. Like, don't show up and just give me your 50%. I'm going to tell you to go home. Like, I don't want it.
Right.
Get out of here with that.
Right.
No. See yourself out. But if you show up and you give me that 100% of the 50, because I know that you're at a 50%, because I asked them prior to practice, like, how are you guys feeling? And they're like, I'm at like 75. I'm like, okay, give me 100% of that. And I see it. And they still get better because they're like, okay, coach isn't expecting me to be at 100% all the time. I'm like, no, but I do want full effort. I want full effort. And I don't feel like most people do that. Yeah. I don't feel like people do that on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and to recognize that we're not all going to show up and have our best. Like, I love Mondays. Everybody in my life knows that. Most people hate Mondays. Mondays are the most productive day of the week. So yeah, I know you're most people. So if you can't, that's okay. But also having your mentor, which as a coach, you're their mentor. No, hey, it's just a rough day for me. Like, I'm going to give you what I have. What a beautiful conversation between the two of you to each know where you're at.
Which it just comes back to making it aware. Like, if you're not aware of the thing, if it's not in the light, we're not going to be able to move forward. We're just going to keep letting it bury us. And I don't want these kids growing up thinking they can't do something because they only have 50% capacity to make it happen. Like, no, just give me that 50%. Give me all of the 50. That's all I ask. And even as a parent, I wake up some days and I tell my kids, hey, don't push my buttons today because I'm operating at 10%, okay? Like, maybe dial it back today because you might see a different side of mom that you don't want to see today. And they do. They dial it back because they understand, like, hey, mom isn't feeling tip-top today. We can't push her buttons. Yeah, or we might end up 6 feet under.
Right. If I'm really quiet, they're like, something's wrong with mom, because I'm pretty high energy. But what you were saying hits perfect with Proverbs that I had written down. Proverb 24:16 says, for though a righteous man falls 7 times, he rises again, but the wicked are brought down by calamity. And so I had just made a note that I think there's this misconception, if you become a Christ follower, that life is easy, like it's easy ticket. And I think a lot of that's Western societies, because much of the world doesn't believe that. And the truth is, whether you believe in Jesus as your savior or not, you are going to have hard. And there's actually verses in here that says this might be harder for you. And so those are trials and they are challenges. And often it's not that God causes those things, but he will allow them for our own personal growth and development to become who he really wants for us. He knows what's best for us. We usually have no idea. We're not on the same page.
Yep. Well, trials are meant to grow you. I was actually listening to a podcast recently, and in the podcast, he was actually talking about group therapy, but he said that his therapist was talking about there's a specific part of our brain, I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, so bear with me. I am not a doctor. I don't know how to pronounce most of these words. but it's the mid-cingulate cortex, which is part of your cerebral cortex, but it literally needs discomfort to grow. So it needs the pain and the hurt and like the uncomfortableness in order to grow. Similar to like if we're in the gym working out, like we're literally ripping apart our muscles to build muscle mass. Like,
Yeah,
just think about that for a second. Like, we want to grow our muscles, we literally have to rip it apart. And so it just blows my mind that people think that in order to be successful, you're never going to hit a road bump. Like, no, you're going to hit one.
Funny.
And then you're going to hit like 100 more. And then you're going to end up at the bottom just to hit 5 more before you even take one step closer to the top. Like,
it's so funny, the working out. I don't know why this just hit me, but there's some guy, and I don't know, he was like an Mr. Olympia or something that my sons follow. And he talks about going to full failure. And he's like screaming at these guys that can't even do, one more thing. And it's full failure because the full failure does do extra rips in your muscles, which then you get in your protein, kids, it rebuilds. I didn't even think about that. It's a perfect analogy of what we are talking about in other areas of our life.
When if we think about it, our brain is a muscle. So that particular cortex in our brain, like it needs that. It needs the uncomfortableness. And if we try really hard to stay away from being uncomfortable, we're just going to stay stuck. And I personally don't want anybody to feel stuck. And so, sorry to tell you, but you're going to have to get really uncomfortable in life if you want to achieve your dreams.
And some of that is also who we decide to surround ourselves with, either physically, like real, like you and I, or books, podcasts, TV, whatever you're taking in, music. Like Lupe is an avid reader. I mean, I thought I was a reader. I read a lot of books. Lupe has me crushed.
I probably send you a new book a week. Like, hey, check this one out.
But you can have true mentors that you know in person. You can also have virtual mentors that are just people that have wisdom. And we have so much available to us now between books and the technology and the phones and all of that. And a good example of that is Moses. In the Bible, he's actually a metaphor for God. A lot of people don't know that. Going through the sea is like baptism. It's like Jesus dying and rising again. There's a bunch of metaphors. But in Exodus 3 and 4, I love it because there's so much conversation with God and him. They just talk like they're buddies, which we should be doing, by the way. He's like, God, you don't want me. Literally at the end, he's like, can't you just pick somebody else? And I'm not really good. I don't think you want me. I'm not a strong leader. And also, I can't really talk. He had a speech impediment. God is like, no, I picked you. And okay, I'll send your brother Aaron with you. Your brother, he can go help you. And so what I love about it is he's like, no, you're still doing this, but I'm going to link you with someone else who loves you and can help hold you accountable. And you see that Aaron literally is lifting his arms up in certain stories in Exodus, but God equips us. He calls us to things we could not imagine. And if we knew what he had intended for us, we probably wouldn't even get out of bed because we'd be like, I'm not doing that, right? And so these little
recovering
steps,
overthinker.
I understand. You and I talk about this a lot. Overthinking is not always your friend, but he will equip you. He is probably going to use your weakest spots. He's probably going to use those failures, like the one you really don't want to deal with. That's what God's going to use. Sorry.
I mean, he got me on this podcast. Let's just start there. Because
I know I had to ask.
Public speaking is not my jam, but I feel like he keeps pushing me at that. I'm like, no, please, no, pick someone else. And he's like, no, I chose you. It's time. And I'm like, no, please, no. But again, that circles back to my worthiness. I don't feel worthy. And he's like, I wouldn't have picked you if you weren't worthy. And I'm like, oh, snap. You got me there again. You got me there.
Well, and it's funny because I have no problem public speaking at all, which is people's biggest fear is public speaking. They'd rather die than publicly speak. However, I had no desire to do a podcast, none whatsoever. And God was like, yeah, I gave you this platform and you're going to do it. Okay. So he will start to set up, and I can see that in some of my other failures, in other development, other business things that I've had. I've learned skills I never thought I would need to know. And those then build to do other things, right? And so these twists and turns we take are not mistakes. They really aren't failures. They're stepping stones. And sometimes you go one forward, two back. Sometimes you go two forward, one back.
It's just the learning process. And I think the more we start viewing failure as just the stepping stones to get to the achievement, I think everybody will be successful.
Do you think you ever arrive?
No.
Yeah, I don't either.
And I don't feel like we should have an end point either. Like, this is something I want to do, but this is also something I want to do. I might hit this one, and I might never hit this one, but I'm going to keep trying for it.
Why do you think you're so curious about personal development and like being a better Lupe? What do you think it is for you?
I think it's just my empathic nature. Like, because I feel, most people don't know this about me, but I feel people's energies. So I know when someone shows up a complete mess, even though there's sunshines and rainbows. And I'm like, no, what's really going on with you? And so I'm just naturally a very curious person because I feel things differently than most. And because of that, it's made me a little more self-aware because I'm like, if I could see that in them, like, why am I trying to shut this thing off about myself? And I'm like, no, I need to do better and figure myself out also. And so personal development is really the only avenue for that. And it's actually helped me help a lot of people because I've worked on myself. Like, I can't help someone if I haven't taken that walk. And like, there's a lot of people that have come to me for help. And I'm like, I haven't been on that journey, but I know someone who has. Can I send you to that person? Like, I don't know what you're going through, and I don't want to pretend like I do because I haven't walked that journey. But there's a lot of things there's a lot of things mental wise that I can help that person with, but their specific journey, I don't touch some of that stuff because it's far beyond mindset work.
Well,
but
and I
just
think
love
it's
to
helpful.
learn too.
I think it's really helpful to also say, like, I'm not an expert at that. Like, I can give you general advice, and I think that's really powerful because there are things we're good at and things that we're not. And so to know when and how to send people, I think is huge.
Which I think is why I do a lot of that, because I do have a lot of people approach me and I'm like, ugh, I'm not versed in that. And so it helps me to be more aware of where I can plug myself in and where I should definitely not be a part of something.
Well, I think one of the challenges we have as a society now, and there's all this data about kids basically from 08 on, just the amount of technology that is always with you, and like our kids they don't know any different. Like, you couldn't disconnect. Like, we would disconnect for the whole weekend and all of that. And so comparison is a really dangerous thing. And through just my different businesses and coaching, I've talked to so many people that it may not even be failure, but they just feel like they're not enough, that they're comparing, not that they want to be, but it's on us all the time.
Yep.
And Psalm 139, 13 and 14 talks about he knit you together in your mother's womb. He knew you before you were made. Like, there's other verses. He knows the number of hairs on your head. Like, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I just want you to know that you are not an accident. There is literally nothing wrong with you. You are supposed to be who you are. God created you on purpose, and there is no one like you, and that is not a bad thing. We have this society trying to conform, and people are photoshopping and putting up. They're not even real. Those people aren't even. That doesn't even exist. It's like a cartoon, right?
Yeah, it's so hard to watch. So hard to watch. Because I'm like, you don't have to do that. Like, you're gorgeous as you are. But comparison is a thing. And I think I feel like it's because people forget that there's two things can be true at one time. Like, people don't want to hold the tension for both. Like, yeah, you could be bad at something, but you could be really great at this part. And together, those things can make something completely different. And so instead of comparing, we should be like, ooh, that makes sense. But also what she's doing makes sense. Maybe if I try them both together, I can be me. And then, but most people don't see it that way. They're just like, I can never do that. Which again, it comes back to the I can't. Like, you've already decided you're going to fail because you're not them. But it's not about being them. It's about being you and the best version of you. And what you bring to the table does matter. And I think people forget that.
Well, and asking God, show me my worthiness. Show me how I can be more like who you see me as. Because even though God did make us perfect, there's always growth for us. That doesn't mean that you should be stagnant or fine. Like, God has so much waiting for us, but we have to say yes to that.
Mm-hmm.
But are you staying in your lane with God, or are you taking all these things from other people? And there will be pieces that, people come into your life for a reason that you should take. But just cross check it with God, because it's so easy to get, like, I am guilty of this. I think you might be too, of the busyness and getting into it. And like, I'm just going to be a doer. I'm just going to be productive. And productive is great, but it may not be what God asked you to do.
I've found myself having to slow down more, which is why I have such a very strict morning and evening routine. Because if I don't set the time to just sit still and be quiet, I'm just going to go all day and not accomplish a single thing. Because I get scatterbrained. Like, squirrel brain is a thing, in case people didn't know. It's a thing. The ADHD definitely kicks in, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do some laundry, and then it's like, oh wait, I also had this to do. And then I start doing that thing, and then I'm like, oh wait, I have dishes I gotta do. And then it's like, oh, okay, I'm in the middle of the dishes. Wait, I have this thing I need to record for my clients. And it's like, oh, I didn't actually get any of it done. And like, that's something I try to teach clients is like, multitasking is not a thing. Like, people will take pride in being able to multitask, and I will tell you, you're on a one-way train to failure if you continue to just try to multitask. There's actually a really good book out there. I have to try to remember what it is, but it talks about solo tasking. And like, even when I spend 30 minutes just focused on this one thing, I get more done in that 30 minutes than I did jumping from thing to thing to thing, which
I am so guilty
blows
of
my mind.
this.
But if I don't take that time in the morning to sit in silence and really ask God, like, what should I be doing today? Which there are some days when social media is not on his calendar for me. And so I just don't go on it. Because I'm like, he told me to stay off, so I'm going to stay off. Because I have found that when I do the thing that he tells me not to do, it's twice as bad. I'm tired of getting slapped in the face by God. So
that's a word.
I'm just going to listen.
Well, and if we step back for a second, because I think we're like, oh, these are the things I do each day. Well, are they? And do you need to check with God? I'm not saying don't go to work. But what I'm saying is, like, if he hasn't ordered that, should you be doing it? And then we get down the road, like, okay, God, I'm doing this thing, just bless it. And he's like, I'm over here.
Yeah, I didn't ask you to go left. I told you to go right. Like, oh, I must have missed that step because I was doing too many things. Which I think it's called the Pomodoro method, is where you do like 15 minutes of focus work and then you rest for 15 minutes, like just completely do nothing. And
that's
then you jump in to 15 minutes again.
That's what I do with one of my sons.
I have to do that with mine too, because she's very ADD. Yeah. Yeah, our children are the same.
Yeah, well, we create them. That happens. Would you be willing to share any bits of your morning or evening routine? I have traveled with you, and it's pretty impressive.
It's pretty specific. I'm usually up by 5:30. Like, usually. Some days I'm like, no, today is not the day. Which is usually Mondays, ironically. I'm like, no, I don't want to get up today.
I'll send you a little text.
Yeah, but usually by the time I get up, I am instantly in my Bible. whether it's the app or my book, because sometimes I leave my book downstairs and I don't want to get out of bed to go get it. So I will whip out the app because my phone is never too far away, which I'm working on that. I'm trying to put the phone in a different room, but I'm really good about once it gets turned off at night, I don't touch it. And I've realized that people have messaged me 100 times and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to look at that, which is also something I do in the morning. I don't look at my text usually till after 7 a.m. Like, if you're trying to get a hold of me, I'm not going to talk to you till after that.
Why do you do
I'm
that?
just not. Because there's just a lot of things that attack me personally. And if I look at that, I'm instantly in like stress and like chaos, and I can't grasp my day if I don't just leave it. Like, no, I'm not ready to function and do the day yet. Sometimes I wait till 8:30, but most of the time it's 7. So like,
So
if
you're
clients,
protecting
yep,
your
I'm
time.
protecting my peace.
Listen to
I
that.
protect
Yeah.
my peace, which is the whole
Okay.
point of creating a morning routine. So I get
Yeah.
in my Bible. I read for about 15-20 minutes-ish. It just depends on how long the chapter is. So, because sometimes they're longer, so it just depends. But at minimum, 15 minutes. And then I meditate. I actually use an app for that because if I were to just sit still by myself, my thoughts would go cray-cray and it wouldn't be silence like it should be.
Which app do you use?
I use the Calm app.
We'll
There's so
link
many
all
good ones
this.
out there, but I think I just like the people who talk on the Calm app. Like, their voices are just soothing, and I'm like, that's what I need. Some other people on other apps, they feel a little abrasive to me, so I'm like, no thank you. No thank you.
Yeah.
I don't, because I'm, again, self-aware. You gotta be self-aware and do what you feel is best for you. And then I read, after I meditate, I read something completely unrelated to faith at all, which is usually a personal development book. Sometimes it's a fiction book. It's rarely a fiction book, though, because I just like reading about how to fix myself because I'm very damaged. I'm very damaged and I need help.
I am recovering.
Yeah, I am a recovering damaged person.
Affirmations.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm in recovery. I will always be in recovery because I don't feel like you ever fully heal from the damage, but being aware of it helps you to move forward. And then I will take my morning supplements, which is just my micronutrients like a multivitamin. And then I have my first meal of the day. And that's within the first 45 to an hour of waking up. And it gets my day started on the right foot. And if I miss a step, better believe my whole day is off. My whole day is off. Well, like, we actually do a Bible study together, and I didn't meditate one day. And like, I'm just sitting in Bible study, like, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, I couldn't sit still that day. I couldn't focus on what anyone was saying in that. And then the next day I was like, oh, I didn't meditate yesterday, and it threw my entire day off. Like, I even had to coach a softball game that day, and it was probably my worst coaching experience because I was just like, my brain was just so scattered because I didn't take the time to calm the noise. And I think if more people sat there, which, like, let's just be clear, meditating isn't necessarily meant to just completely silence your brain because thoughts always come in. Like, your brain, I don't feel ever really shuts off. But when I do start thinking of things when I'm supposed to just be sitting in peace, I just will tell myself, like, oh, I'm thinking, and then that thought goes away. And then I'm back to just being calm and centered. And I think if people took the time, I mean, I do it sometimes during the day. Like, I'll sit just peacefully and I'm like, okay, I'm thinking, because sometimes my day just gets chaotic. Because, like I said, I'm an empath. Sometimes people's energy will throw me off. It will throw me off. And so I will circle back to just sitting for a couple minutes. In those instances, it's like 2 minutes max. I need to like reset myself.
I think that's wise. And prayer is meditation. You know, some people go like, ooh, well, no, if you actually look at what it's doing. And yes, there are some new age, other forms of it that you can get into, but prayer is really, really powerful. And meditation, like setting our mind and the breathing and all of it. And especially for those of us that struggle with focus or just high energy. And it is such a powerful tool. And so I will for sure link that.
And we also don't sit still enough to allow God to speak to us. And so like that's me, like, because I'll do the Bible and like read the things, and sometimes within that I'll say a couple prayers, not always, but sometimes just reading a certain verse I'm like, oh, that hit me pretty deep because that's what's happening in my life right now. And so I'll say a little prayer about it, and then me sitting in meditation is allowing him the opportunity to actually talk to me, because we don't always let him talk. We, like, you and I have talked about this. We talk a lot at him, but we don't really give him a chance to talk to us. And so I view meditation as the time where I shut up and let him fill me up.
I am so guilty of that. It's one of the areas I really struggle with because I spend a lot of time with the Lord, but I'm mostly blah, 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 and not waiting and giving him that peace. And a couple of years ago, it's kind of like a guided prayer session. It's called Sozo.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very skeptical of it. And I heard a few people went through it. And so I went through it. And one of the things that came out of it was it creates this space, right, for you, because you don't make space to sit and listen to God. And so one of the questions was, God, show me how you see me. And for some people, it's visual. For some, you hear it, some you see it. I'm very visual. And I was so shocked by how he saw me. One of the things, which is funny because this is almost pink, is that I'm light pink. And I'm like, what? Because I grew up as a tomboy. I'm like, pink? And I have started to embrace pink because God said, yeah, you're tender. You're really kind. You're a sensitive person. It's not a weakness. This is how I made you. Are you asking God how he sees you? Because that also then goes back to your worthiness. Because for me, some of the things I was told as a kid, I saw those all as defects, not as assets. Now they can be if I just live in my emotions, sure, that is a problem. But the fact that I am tender, I can relate to people really well, right? It's not a bad thing. And so asking God these things, he cares. He wants to answer your questions. But he's not an 8-ball. And so if you're only showing up to him in the crisis and then demanding that he does your thing, you're probably left pretty empty.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, to finish off my routine, I just look over my day. Like, I pull out my planner, which you were so kind to send me a prayer planner. And so I literally mark out, I actually break up my day in 15-minute increments. I didn't bring my planner to show you what it looks like, but it is color coordinated. You'd be very proud of me. It is color coordinated. But
Lupe's is the most beautiful. Mine is scribbles. Hers,
I
I'll link
literally
this.
break it down 30-minute increments my day. And so I do mark out the part of the day where I'm doing my meditation and all that. And I even make space to take a shower so that I don't schedule a call when I should be showering after my workout, because I do work out in the morning. Shower. Yep. Which I look at my planner and then I work out right after I'm done, because I want to see what's on my schedule so that in case there's something that I might have missed, I can add it in real quick. Because a lot of times if we're not planning, we're actually planning for failure, because without structure, you just kind of willy-nilly go through the day, and that just creates more chaos. And so I want to protect my peace at all costs. I am not a fan of chaos, and when my life feels chaotic, it's just bad. It's just real bad.
Well, you made me think of, so we both have multiple years of health coaching, and I'll make sure to put all of Lupe's different contact links. She does health coach. She does have amazing supplements. She does mindset coaching. You can just follow along with her on social media. But one of the things that it makes me think of with health coaching, where did my brain go? I totally lost it. ADD squirrel. Oh, here's what it is. I'm just going to use health as an example. Okay, on Monday, I'm going to do these 500 things. I'm going to drink all my water. I'm going to have a whole bunch of protein, lots of fiber, no carbs at all because they're horrible. Spoiler, they're not horrible. I am going to, have the cranberry juice, whatever you're going to do, right? But you've given yourself 40 or 50 things, and you're going to work out really intense and blah, blah, and you've been doing none of it. By Tuesday morning, you've done like 3.5 of the things on your list, and you feel like garbage.
Yep.
And so you don't show up. You don't show up for yourself. And I learned from Chris Powell, who is actually a very well-known health coach. He's had some big obesity television shows in the past and stuff. And actually he struggled with addiction. He's a great person to follow in general. I'm actually not sure if he's a believer, but he's a good mindset with health. When he took on clients, he wouldn't let them do anything other than commit to getting enough water. And he made them do it for 2 weeks. And once they could show that they were faithful in that, they could add something else. And by something else, it was like 5 minutes walking.
Mm-hmm.
So we often set ourselves up for failure, even if it's in like the morning routine Lupe just shared. It's amazing. Pick one of those things.
Yep.
Work on it. Set an alarm in your phone for 2 weeks, 7 a.m. every morning or whatever it is for you, because it takes 21 days to make a habit, but not really. It's 66
Technically,
days.
it's 66.
And it takes a year for it to be automatic.
Yep.
So whatever you want to take in, it takes time. So also don't have these expectations of yourself that are ridiculous, because then you are setting yourself up for failure and you are harder on yourself than anyone else.
Yep. Which that's how I built my routine. It didn't just happen overnight. I literally did one thing at a time. And even like when I was doing my own health journey, like I tried doing all the things all at once and I got nowhere. I got stuck and not losing weight. And I was like, which led me to just being frustrated and wanting to give up and throw in the towel. So I'm like, no, where's square one? Just show me to square one and the one thing I can do in square one. And once I finished that, I was like, okay, I'm ready for another thing because I've gotten really consistent at this.
Well, and not even in the failure, then what I see of self-sabotage. Well, I went and got a whole pizza and I ate the whole thing, which you wouldn't have done last week before you even started.
Yeah.
Like,
which is also something I try to tell clients is like, yeah, sometimes we mess up and we go outside of our structure and we have a choice meal because you're not in a moral dilemma. It's not cheating. It's a choice. You made a decision. Okay, let's clean up our words around things. It's not anything moral. It is, you made a choice to eat unhealthy. Just work on not doing it twice in a row.
Yeah. And
because
if you
can, exactly. It's like, and enjoy it in the moment. I know for me personally, when I step out and make choice meals, I'm like, I feel like crud. So then I'm definitely having something good for my body the next meal because I'm like, I don't like that feeling. I don't like that feeling at all. But as long as you don't consistently do the bad thing, you're going to break it up and eventually you're going to get to a point where you're only doing the good thing. But as long as you don't make the same mistake twice in a row, you're going to continue to get better, which is also what I teach my players. I think I said it earlier today. Like, hey, you might have messed up this time. Try to get it right the next time. And then it'll just kind of keep building. But of course, they like do it wrong. Then they do it right. Then they do it wrong. Then they do it right. But eventually they're doing it right. Because they just keep going towards like, oh, right. Okay, I made that mistake. We're not going to make this mistake again. And then they're going to make it again. It's like, okay, I'm not. But then eventually, you're just making the right choice every time. It takes time.
One of the things I love about your coaching, because I've heard you say this with your girls, is that you expect them to mess up. You expect them, especially if it's the beginning of season, you got 12-year-olds, some of them are younger. They're not going to be very good at whatever skill set. But if they're like that halfway through the season or the entire season, you're expecting to see change from them. And so you've even said to some of the girls, because of course they all love sliding, it's their favorite. And you're like, I don't expect you to be great at it. Like if we've never done this skill, how would you be good at it?
Yep. One, it's the
Just
same when I'm doing with my health
expectation.
clients. Like, we've never done this particular kind of structure, so I expect you to mess up. You're going to. It's going to happen. But I also expect you to make the choice to not continually mess up. But that's on you. Like, I can give you the tools, but I can't use them for you. Which is also the hard part as a coach.
I feel like we should, because I know what you really want people to take away is that just resetting what your expectations on what failure is. And there's something that I love doing, and I think you love doing it too. A it goes back to our worthiness, because how can we flip this around? And that's affirmations. Do you want to talk about that at all? Because if not, I can talk about it.
I'm going to be full disclosure. I am not the best with personal affirmations. This is something I'm still working on. I am someone that will do it one day and maybe not so much the next day, but then I'll do it the next day. So that's why I said, as long as you're not doing it consecutively, eventually it's going to be something that I do every day. But I'm still a work in progress.
Okay, so
but I do know that our words matter. They matter. They matter 100%. And it's funny because just thinking about this, I write letters to my girls at the end of every season. It affirms who I see them as. They may not see them as this, but I see them as this. Because I know that this is what's probably going to help most of them get to where they want to be. And because I don't do it for myself personally, I'm working on it. But I do recognize that constantly calling out the best parts of me, even if I don't believe it right now. Calling it out, eventually it is going to be something that I believe. And I am going to walk in that truth. But it takes time. It's not necessarily lying to yourself because it is fact. And I know this because people have told me certain things about me. And I'm also working on receiving compliments. I think that's why I struggle with affirmations, because I struggle with receiving compliments. And so that's why it's hard for me. But I do recognize that when I do them, I am a much happier person, which I do consider myself an obnoxiously optimistic human. Like sometimes to a fault, I'm optimistic, but I think it's because I hear those things and I feel like I'm probably starting to believe it, or I wouldn't have this optimism. And I think people are forgetting that one crucial step, like just be nice to yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that's
Mel Robbins even wrote that book, the High Five book. Like,
I love
I do that every day, but I don't necessarily always say words to myself because there's power in giving yourself a high five every morning.
Well, and I feel like you're doing it in different ways. Like you are affirming yourself. So, I have these, they're kind of like little flashcards. I've gotten some off of Etsy before. I've made some and I put them on my mirror in my bathroom because same thing.
Is it like a deck of cards like you could shuffle?
You could, but so I just tuck them into my mirror and I rotate them. And so some of them are just statements and then some of them are actually scripture and you can put your name into that scripture. And so whatever areas I'm struggling in, because the reality is for that negative thing, you need to hear the opposite 10 times. And so we truly need to rewire our brain and hear ourselves saying what the truth is. How does God see you? And you may not believe it at all. But if you keep repeating it, eventually it starts to stick, right?
Yeah. When it's really cool when you can see it happen in real time. Like I had a player, it was 2 years ago at a softball camp I coached at. And I can tell she was just all in her head. And so the whole camp, I was just affirming that she's a badass because she was stellar. Like, I couldn't believe this kid was at this skills camp because the skills camp, this particular one, was not for kids of her caliber. It was for the kids that are still trying to figure it out. And I was like, what is happening? But because she was beating herself up emotionally, I was like, I see why you're here. I recognize that. And I'm really grateful that you're in my group because I don't think any other coach could have handled her in the way that she needed to be handled for what was actually happening with her. Because it wasn't her physical skill. It was, she thought she was doing awful, and she wasn't. She wasn't. And so, as per normal, I wrote her a letter at the end, just affirming her and how I was super excited to watch her in the finals, the D1 final national championship. I was excited to see her there as the #1 catcher in the nation. And she came to me after, and she was like, no coach, like she's bawling, and I'm about to start crying because I'm like, I cannot. Like, when someone's crying, I'm just like instant blubbering, like, but she came to me and she's like, I have never had a coach know who I am. Like, I feel like I know who I am, but like, you actually see me. Like, you see me. And I was just like, and at the same time, like, thank you. Because it's necessary to affirm the greatness in people, especially yourself. Especially yourself.
So you made me think of Avatar. I did not want to watch that movie. I was so irritated on Christmas Day. Our whole family, we always watch movies, and they're like, let's watch Avatar. I go, really? The blue people? And it's like 3 hours long. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. And one of my favorite lines is the, I see you. Like, it's an I love you, but it's in a different way. Like, I am paused and I see who you are, which is what this athlete was telling you, which is really sweet because we all want to be seen.
Yep.
Right.
And sometimes we just have to take the time, especially with ourselves, to recognize that greatness. Because it's in there. God designed us for it. It's in there.
It is.
We just have to pull it out.
Yes. You are not a failure.
Nope.
You are perfectly worthy. Right.
You may fail at times, but you are not a failure.
Yeah. There you go. That's true. That's true. It's just a step.
No,
Well,
you are not your failures, okay, people? You are not your failures.
It doesn't define who you are. And I'm so proud of you for coming on here, doing something that makes you a little bit afraid. High five. Pat on the back.
Just because you're afraid doesn't mean you can't do it.
Exactly. Do it afraid sometimes.
I have done a lot of things terrified.
Is there anything that you want us to know before we go, or any other resources or anything that we haven't chatted about?
Not that I can think of off the cuff. Okay. I'm sure there is plenty because I'm a personal development junkie, but off the cuff, I can't. My brain doesn't work that fast.
She's amazing. When she chooses to use social media, which is off and on, her content is fantastic. So I'll put all the links on how you can get connected with her. And I hope that you do follow her. And we hope this was really, really helpful to you. Okay, it's stopping. Hold on. I hope that today's podcast was a blessing to you. We appreciate you over here at Live Your Life Out Loud. If you could go follow us, share this podcast, and give us a review, it would greatly help us get the word out. Have a wonderful week.